All right, so here I have my concluding project for biology. 3 questions, 3 pictures, and I'm gonna explain them all. So first of all, my first question was, what's the role of the different hormones in regulating the menstrual cycle? And we have mainly 4 different hormones that we're going to focus on. We have estrogen, progesterone, FHS, which stands for follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, which is luteinizing hormone. And we all have these throughout the menstrual cycle, like women. So if we're gonna start with the follicle phase, because when that begins, then levels of estrogen and progesterone are low, and that means that the thickened lining of the uterus, it breaks down, and then the menstrual bleeding occurs, like the menstruation starts. And about this time, then the follicle stimulating hormone, the FHS hormone level slightly increases, and that means it's stimulating the development of several follicles in the ovaries. And each of these follicles contains an egg, and later in the phase, then the follicle stimulating hormone level decreases, and there's only one of these follicles that continue to develop. And this one follicle produces estrogen. And when the ovulatory phase begins, then uh, it starts with a surge in the LH hormone and also in the FSH hormone levels. So that rises intensely. And the luteinizing hormone, the LH, stimulates an egg release, which means that this is where the ovulation happens. And the estrogen level decreases during the surge, and the progesterone level starts to increase at this point. And then we make it to the luteal phase. And during this, then the LH hormone and the FHS hormone levels decrease, and the ruptured follicle closes after releasing the egg and forms a corpus luteum, which produces a lot of progesterone. And also during this phase, the estrogen level is high, and progesterone and estrogen cause this lining of the uterus to thicken even more to prepare for a possible fertilization. But if the egg is not fertilized, then the corpus luteum degenerates and no longer produces this progesterone, and the estrogen level also decreases, and that causes the whole lining, the thick lining that's been building up, to deteriorate, and the menstrual bleeding starts again. So this is the start of a new cycle. But if the egg is fertilized, then the corpus luteum continues to function during the early pregnancy, and it helps maintain the whole pregnancy. So generally, estrogen is produced by the ovaries during the menstrual cycle, and it helps make the lining of the uterus go thick, and it also stimulates the FSH hormone and the LH hormone release pre-ovulation, and it also inhibits FSH and the LH for most of the cycle. Progesterone is produced by the ovaries during the menstrual cycle and the pregnancy as well, and it also helps thicken the uterine lining, and it when the levels of this fall, then the uterine breaks down and causes menstruation, and it also helps stimulate blood supply to the lining. And the FSH is helps stimulate the development of the follicle for the egg to mature, and also it produces estrogen. And LH is the surge that causes the ovulation, and so that stimulates the mature egg to be released, and then it results in the formation of a corpus luteum. Okay, so now we're moving on to the next one, which is how are traits being passed on from parents to offspring. So generally, you have 23 pairs of chromosomes in every cell, and you have uh, on those you have one from your mom and one from your dad, and each of these chromosomes have a large strand of DNA. And on this DNA, there's a code for the gene, and the genes are which we inherit from our it's traits that we inherit from our parents. And by talking about these, we use alleles. And with alleles, there are either 2 or more different kinds of genes. And like we have a gene for hair color, and within that we have a lot of kinds of alleles. Like there's the blonde hair allele, there's the brown hair allele, and there's the black hair allele, and so on. Like for each of these things, that's gonna be traits that we get passed on, or genes that we pass on from, like, as parents. But when referring to alleles, then we usually use letters. Like we can give the allele that gives brown eyes big D, and the allele that gives blue eyes little d. And in a set of chromosomes, there are 2 genes that gives instructions for the same thing. Like in the example with eye color of the child, then if the father has brown eyes and the mother has blue eyes, then there are 3 different combinations for the allele for the child that can be put together. And the brown allele, which is the big D, and the blue allele, which is the little d, the combinations can either be big D, little d, or big D and little d. So that's the 3 ways it can be put together. And the way the alleles are written are called the genotypes, which is the genetic makeup of the organism. But there's also something called the phenotype, and that's the feature of an organism, which is what you can see. And when the alleles are identical of a particular gene, it's said to be homozygous. And when there are 2 different alleles for the same particular gene, it's called heterozygous. So when alleles are heterozygous, it means that there's a dominant and there's a recessive allele. And the dominant allele will be the expressed allele, and the recessive allele will not be expressed. So if we use the same example again with the eye color, and then the father has brown eyes and the mother has blue eyes, then the dominant allele is brown, because brown is the capital letter, and blue is the recessive, which is the small letter. And because it's the small letter, that means it's not being expressed. And the genotype would look like big D, little d, and the phenotype would just be brown, because brown is the dominant one. And when alleles are homozygous, it means that the alleles are codominant, and that means that both of the alleles are being expressed. For example, if the mother and the father both have blue eyes, then the genotype put together is going to be little d, and that means both of the alleles are expressed, and the phenotype would be blue. And the dominant allele decides what will be expressed of the particular gene, and the recessive allele is only expressed when there are no dominant allele present. So that's kind of how it all being put together, with traits being passed on from offspring and how we inherit the different ones. We have to think of alleles as recessive and dominant and codominant, and that's the general type. And phenotype and genotype we have to remember as well. So it's a little bit of a complicated process, but it's easy to understand whenever that you've worked with it for a long time. So now we're going to move on to the last part, which is explain how the peppered moth was able to adapt to the changes in its environment. And you see this picture here, which is the unpolluted environment and a polluted environment. So we're talking about camouflage in this, because it's all about environment as well as it is for like how the animals mutate. And not all animals can change their skin color according to the environment like chameleons do. Like usually they have to just adapt to the whole environment, and they do that by mutating. And so if we look at this peppered moth, in the beginning it was primarily just a light gray with some black on it, and it made it fit really great with the camouflage, with like just resting on a tree, because black peppered moth or just peppered moths fly during the night and they rest during the day, and they just rest on the tree. And to be able to do that, then they have to be able to blend in with the tree to not be kind of be seen by the predators. But because of pollution, then some trees, the color has changed to being more dark. And that means that the light peppered moth then has a hard time blending in this. But there's also a mutation of this light peppered moth, and that's a dark peppered moth. And suddenly this mutation was very ideal, and suddenly the dark peppered moth was favored. Um, because then the dark peppered moth could blend in with the tree. So it's really all about the whole environment. And so the dark peppered moth can now uh, hide during the day, but it also depends on how dark the tree is because it can't hide on a light tree like the light peppered moth. Um, so a general answer to this question is that it's all about the camouflage. And even though that our environment changes, then the whole peppered moth, it simply mutated into being able to blend in with the tree and being able to have a high survival rate and not be taken by other predators, which is really smart in this case. So that was my concluding project. Thank you.